Yes, and both my parents are Dutch. So my mother, she was born in Amsterdam, and she moved down to South Africa where she met my dad. She was about 5 years old actually when she left Amsterdam. My dad, his side, they had been in South Africa for a number of generations actually, and my dad's actually been in the process now of tracing back the family history to see when it was that the original family came into South Africa. So it's been rather interesting to learn that side. But originally the family is Dutch. There's a bit of Flemish and French and Irish and English and German thrown in there as well, just to kind of spice things up. So I had my early childhood there in South Africa from when I was born, obviously, till when I was 9 years old. But so what I can remember, it's those playful years as a kid where nothing really sinks and hits you. You're just in your own space and you're going to school and you're loving life, right? My parents had a decently sized house. I think it was probably about a half-acre size lot. And they had actually designed the house themselves. So they were probably about 27, 28, and they hired an architect and designed this dream house for themselves. It was a single level that went all the way out, and it was built into the side of the hill, and it went straight out, and underneath they actually built a small little second living space where my mom had a nursing primary school as well, so she could teach kids. But it was a great childhood. It was pretty free. We could run around the block in the neighborhood as much as we wanted to. We could go for miles in any direction, and we would play with all the neighborhood kids. We'd run around barefoot all the time, actually, because that was just the common thing to do, and nobody worried. If you stepped and hurt yourself, oh well, that was just too bad. You learn and don't do it again next time. And we had a couple of empty fields next door to our house where people hadn't built any properties yet. So me and my sister, we would always go into these really high grassy fields. At our age, we were probably only maybe 2 or 3 feet tall, right? So we would go through these tall grass fields, and we think that this is just the middle of the jungle. And so we'd play through and get into the dirt and just have fun as little kids. Yeah, I remember when my parents came and said to me that we were going to move to Canada. And I thought, Canada? What's Canada? Where's Canada? I thought in my head, I thought for sure, okay, this is just going to be like a new town. It's going to be still South Africa. I can still come back and see my old friends. And I thought, I don't really want to go. Forget this. I want to stay here. I'm happy right here. We don't need to move. But my parents tried to convince me. They tried to convince me with things like skiing. Hey, you can go skiing in Canada. I don't know what skiing is. They told me the words, and I understood the words, but the mental picture wasn't there. I thought, skiing? What the heck is skiing? This doesn't make any sense to me. So politically, they wanted to get out of South Africa. There was a lot of bad things that started to happen with the terrorism. Back then they were still calling it terrorism, it's not just a new thing that people call it now. But the ANC started bombing a lot of cafes and places, and my mom and my dad would tell me when I asked them now that they didn't feel safe, right? If they went to the mall to go buy something, they were stopped by security and they got searched going into the malls. So they decided, one, they didn't agree with the way that the government went with the apartheid movement. My dad and my mom were both pretty liberal, so they didn't agree with the politics, and once things really started to get out of hand, they decided, okay, that's it. This country is not going to be a good place to live anymore. But I remember I was in ESL class for the start of it, which I had to go into. It's compulsory, as an immigrant, you have to go to ESL. Even though my family had put me into an American school in South Africa for 2 months prior. So I was fluent I was fluent in English, right? I mean, they took it to the point where they would make little sticky notes and put it on objects around the house and force me to speak English all the time. So me and my sister, we picked it up right away. So I come into Canada, and first of all, it's cold, okay? I mean, it's probably about August, September-ish, and it's just freezing cold. My sister and me are not used to this, so we have to put these big wool jackets and walk to school. My mom now walks us to school, whereas before we would just walk to school ourselves. So it was different, you know, it's inner city type stuff, so it's very different from being out in the suburbs of South Africa. And the sports were all different. So I'm used to, at this point, playing cricket with all my buddies, okay? And so I get out there in the playground, and I'm trying to talk to some kids, and I see this game that they're playing out there, and they go, like, what is this? Is it like cricket? And I look at me like, what the heck is cricket? So I join in, I can listen to let me play, and I remember I'm trying to figure out how you're supposed to swing the bat, right? I'm trying to swing it down like a cricket bat. They say, oh no, you gotta put up and you gotta swing like this. All right, so I remember I swung and I hit the ball, and then I ran around the bases, and I managed to hit it far enough that I could run all the way and come home. And so again, I don't know the rules of baseball, but I hit home, and I immediately started running around again to try and get another home run. Because I thought, oh, it's just like cricket, you know, once you come around, you just go back again and try to get more runs. Right? So it took a little time to adjust. And of course with the accent, it's, you know, immediately stick out. But it was okay, it wasn't too bad. As the years went by, there were more and more South Africans that came to Canada. And so eventually you could get, you can go to a South African butcher. Actually, that was set up in Toronto. And in Vancouver, there's a South African that set up his own butcher shop, you know, who's taken these things from South Africa, the waste to make these things, brought it to Canada. And so you can now get it readily there. But when my parents first moved in, they had to try and make all these things by themselves, right? So I still remember, they tried to make this beef jerky that we make back home in South Africa called biltong. It's not like the jerky that you get here. So of course, you know, they have to try and make it themselves. And they would hang this meat underneath the stairs for a month to try and get this stuff right. And I just remember them experimenting and not usually getting it done quite right. And so eventually when they found out there was a butcher they could go to, they would just go there. And then we had boerewors and biltong and all these things all the time. But they still brought with them, when they first moved in to Canada, one of the many pots that they used to make potjiekos, right? And so my dad would, he like converted a barbecue to fit one of these potjiekoses. So I mostly feel like I'm Canadian. Like I've pledged allegiance to Canada basically. I remember going through the signing ceremony and being awarded my citizenship. I had to go to court, I had to sing the anthem, I had to make this pledge. So I was born into South Africa, but I never made the commitment to be South African, but I've made the commitment now to be Canadian. So I think that is what sticks in me. And so if you say or ask what I latch onto as a Canadian, you know, I have to say hockey, of course, for one thing. Although I never played hockey, I'm terrible on ice, okay? I played rugby when I was actually in high school and college. But food-wise, you know, I will definitely latch onto maple syrup, Canadian bacon, and poutine. From my experience, I don't see moving around as being detrimental. So I think I've come out okay. I'm still alive. I'm not, you know, dead or whatever. So I feel it's okay. It's okay to move around. I think it definitely disrupts a child's upbringing, obviously, but it also makes you aware of the world. I think that is an important thing to have with you, especially moving from different places. And I've actually toyed with the idea. This is one of the dreams. Is if I do have kids and if I do get married, who knows? You know, I would like to have them in another country. I'd like to give, well, I wouldn't give birth to them, but I'd like them to be born in Amsterdam or the Netherlands or maybe even South Africa. Because I feel one of the greatest things that my parents gave me is this international identity, I think. You know, whether they consciously decided to have that or not, that's, I think, something that I've gained from their experience and their decisions. I'm Canadian, and I'm South African, and I'm Dutch, and now I'm partly American as well, right? So that combination, I think, is very important, especially going forward. Our world is only going to get smaller. So I think the best thing that I could give my kids is that identity as well. And so I'd like to have them in another country and then bring them back somewhere else and possibly raise them up and give them a split.